Do you hear that? It isn't the wind. It's crying. I stopped in the daylight and let the sound sit in my chest. My wife's hand found my sleeve and we both listened, the way you listen at a door you're afraid to open. Thin, breaking, hopeful, then breaking again. The kind of sound that lifts your hand before your mind decides. Sun pooled on the steps, and dust hung where a door had been shut for the last time. Across the yard, a tiny shape stood under the shadow of a sold sign. His eyes were wet, as if the day had washed over them and left salt behind. He held a crushed white bag between his teeth, jaw trembling, breath catching. The sign cast a crooked bar across his muzzle like a shadow collar. The grass moved, the wood creaked, and the crying puppy did not move. Some part of me leaned toward him even before my feet did. There were boards across the windows and a clean rectangle on the siding where numbers used to be. No toys, no bowl, no leash. Only that bag and a sound that made my throat tight. When I stepped forward, he didn't retreat. He pulled the bag closer instead. If I blinked, I would miss the flicker of his ribs, the small electric shiver in his legs. I could hear the faint click of teeth on plastic, a metronome of waiting. It was like he was holding on to a heartbeat the house had taken away. I crouched and lowered my voice, slow and low, so he could choose the distance. The puppy smelled of milk and warm lint and something else. A second small life caught on the plastic like a note you can't throw away. He blinked, and the bag rustled like a whisper that didn't want witnesses. I wanted to ask where it hurt, but the answer was already between his teeth. My wife twisted a cap off a bottle and set it by my shoe, metal clicking once on the walk. He flinched at the sound, then held ground, eyes sliding from me to the water and back. Slow breaths, long pauses, talking to a skittish heart, not with words but with the shape of quiet. The bottle's edge kissed the grass, and the scent of cool water edged the warm plastic and the stale scent of somewhere else. We took one more step, careful as if the ground could crack under the weight of his hope. He didn't come to my hand. He tugged the bag toward himself and lifted his chin like a guard on a night shift he never asked for. He was waiting for people who won't come back. The voice came from the fence, low and careful, as if the story might spook. Ms. Garner leaned in, knuckles white on the slat, eyes but steady. "Sold the place," she said, barely above a breath. "They loaded a truck and left before daylight. He started then and he hasn't stopped." She told us he wouldn't let anyone near the steps, not to feed him, not to touch him, not even to set down kindness without the bag between. He cried through noon heat and through the thin kind of night that pretends to be quiet. She left a bowl once and found it untouched, dragged half an inch closer to the white plastic by morning. Delia went to her knees like you go to a church you haven't visited in years. She twisted the cap and poured a slow ribbon into a shallow lid. The little jaw kept its hold, but the tongue reached, desperate and polite at the same time. Water dripped from the corner of the bag and tapped the step like a clock. He drank without blinking, then pulled the bag back against his chest as if it might float away. No blame in the air, only the ache of what isn't here. The fence smelled of sun and old paint, but the bag held another world, stale and sweet, a room folded into crinkle and crease. I've learned that a rescued puppy sometimes survives on nothing but scent and the patience of strangers. This wasn't guarding. This was keeping a promise he couldn't name. I spoke in the voice I save for thunder and waking dreams. Easy. Slow. My hand hovered open, palm up, showing him there was nothing to take. The tiny pup watched my fingers like they were weather. He didn't step in or back. Delia slid the water closer until it kissed the wood. He glanced at her, then at me, then at the fence like he was taking attendance. I let the silence do most of the talking. When I reached again, I stopped at the edge of his shadow and waited for his answer. He let me touch the tip of his ear, warm and shaking, and then he clenched the bag even tighter. "Take me, just don't take this." He told us that without words, with the white bag clenched like a small raft in a too big sea. Delia eased a towel under his belly, slow as sunrise. I slid an arm beneath his chest and felt bones like pencils and a heartbeat skipping against my wrist. He trembled, but he did not surrender the crumpled plastic. When the car door clicked shut, he made a thin sound that slid between my ribs and stayed there. We set him on the back seat with the towel and the bottle cap of water. He would sip, then check the bag the way you check a door at night. The road hummed, and the puppy crying rose and fell with each turn like a radio barely catching signal. Delia whispered nothing words, the kind that keep breathing steady. I kept my eyes forward and counted his breaths through the mirror. In the bright room with the cold table, hands were gentle and voices stayed in the soft register strangers use when they mean no harm. No fractures, no fever. Gums pale, skin loose when lifted. Dehydrated, underweight, pulse thin but fighting. Separation response, they said, listening again. Likely scent fixation. Do not take the bag. It's his anchor. They wiped his face and left the bag dry. They called it an olfactory tether and told us how to use it for sleep and meals. Keep it near, not in the mouth when you can help it. Trade it for food a few heartbeats at a time. Never force, let him choose. On the form they wrote what the world had already written on his bones, abandoned puppy. They circled a line about patience twice. Back in the car, he pressed his nose into the folds and found the breath he'd been missing. He didn't sleep, not really. He dozed in pieces as if rest might shatter if he held it too tight. The bag rustled like a lullaby made of paper and old air. Delia covered him with the towel, and I drove with both hands light on the wheel, as if the road itself could wake him. We brought him home, and we did not open the bag. He didn't need a house. He needed a scent. Night folded over the room and left only the small sounds. We kept the lights low and the air still. He pressed his nose into the white bag and cried in a thin, breaking ribbon. When the sound softened, it wasn't sleep. It was a pause he borrowed from somewhere far away. We worked in a quiet rhythm. A cap of water, a spoonful of softened food, a warm towel fresh from the dryer, tucked like a promise along his ribs. I swapped the bowl when it cooled, hands slow, voice slower. Delia sat on the floor beside him, knees drawn up, humming under her breath like a heartbeat that wouldn't argue. He drank without lifting his eyes, tongue quick, jaw clenched around the crinkle. When the bag slipped, panic flickered, and the crying returned, the way pain returns to a place it knows. He turned the plastic under his chin and held it there, breath hitching. A scared puppy will fight the dark with anything that smells like before. We called the vet on speaker and let the room listen. Put the bag in his bed, she said. Scent therapy, not in his mouth, if you can help it, beside his face. Trade seconds of contact for food and back again. Let him keep the choice. We built a nest from an old sweater and set the bag beside the hollow. He watched our hands like weather. He edged forward, then stopped, like someone reading a line twice to make sure it's safe. I laid a palm on the floor, showing him I wouldn't take what it'd take. He guarded. He wasn't a shelter dog on paper, but everything in the room learned to hold him that way. Water within reach, food in breaths, not minutes. No sudden kindness that felt like grabbing. The house ticked. A pipe clicked somewhere, and he startled hard, then tunneled deeper into the plastic smell. I waited it out with him, counting 10 slow beats and starting again. Delia's shoulder touched the cabinet, and she didn't move, as if stillness could become a blanket. We shifted the bag from teeth to cheek, 1 inch at a time. He resisted, trembling, then let the weight settle against his face. The sound thinned to a tiny thread and then finally went quiet. He fell asleep for a minute, and I was afraid to breathe. A name comes when you hear the story. Morning thinned the dark and found us where we'd left our breaths. He had dozed in scraps, face pressed to the white bag, one paw hooked like an anchor. The room smelled like warm fabric, and last night's fear softened at the edges. I waited for the sound that used to break him, and it didn't come. Not yet. On the bag, I saw a set of scratches I hadn't noticed in the lamplight. Not straight, not random. A curve, then a smaller line riding it. A feather, if you tilted your head and believed for a second. I touched the plastic with one finger and felt the tiny ridges like a map of something we were meant to read. Like a feather, my wife whispered, voice careful not to wake the ache. Like a quill. The word didn't land hard. It floated, then settled. His ear twitched, and he lifted his eyes without lifting the bag. I said it once, just above a breath. Quill. His gaze found my mouth, then the bag, then me again. A loyal puppy can hold a whole world between his teeth and somehow still hear the smallest invitation. I didn't ask him to let go. I asked the name to sit beside him and make room. We traded seconds the way the vet had told us. A fingertip on the plastic, a pause. The bowl nudged an inch closer. Quill. The sound made a path he could walk without leaving the thing that kept him brave. Names are bridges, not cages. They carry weight from one shore to another. If there is such a thing as a rescue story dog, he was both the headline and the margin note, shaking but reading along with us. He blinked slow, the way you do when the page finally comes into focus. His jaw eased, just slightly, just enough to prove the world could change without breaking. Quill, I say again, and he takes his first short breath without a cry. Trust isn't a step, it's a breath. We set a schedule you could set your pulse by. Every 2 hours the timer chimed and we repeated the same small prayer. Water first, then a spoonful of softened food. Bag beside his cheek, not in his mouth if we could help it. My voice low enough to leave room for the room. His ribs showed less when he exhaled, and I learned to wait for that exhale before I moved. I held the bowl with one hand and kept the other open, palm up on the floor. He watched the space between them like a bridge over water. When he leaned in, he touched my palm with his nose, quick and careful, then stayed. Not a step, just the permission of contact. I kept still until his shoulders softened and the shallow scoops began again. On the phone, the vet pressed the point. Alternate distance, she said. Move the bag a meter away for a few heartbeats, then return it. We're teaching his body that safety can stretch. So we did. I counted slow to 5, slid the plastic back, and pretended nothing in the world had shifted except the angle of light. An anxious puppy negotiates with the world 1 inch at a time. He would pause mid-chew to check that the white shape was where memory left it. If it wasn't, panic rose like a tide, and we brought it back before the first wave broke. Then we tried again. A minute later, 2. The clock hands moved like someone pushing a stubborn door. He began to test his own courage without meaning to. He'd breathe with the bag by his cheek and not his teeth. He'd let a droplet of water hang on his whisker without shaking it off. Tiny mercies. He looked less like a guard and more like a boy learning a new language very slowly. A gentle pup, except when the dark pressed on the windows and history spoke up. We held the room steady, air warm, voices soft, hands predictable. I told him he wasn't losing anything by choosing to rest. I told myself the same thing. Night came, and the house ticked its old metronome. He stretched, longer than before, and let his breath find mine. He didn't choose my lap. He chose my hand. And the bag he nudged toward himself with only the tip of his teeth. We were afraid we'd find nothing inside. He slept hard for the first time, cheek on the plastic, breath riding the rise and fall like a small boat. We waited through 10 slow counts and then 5 more, not to be brave, just to be sure. Delia nodded once, and I slid the bag from under his chin the way you slide a letter from a sleeping hand. The crinkle sounded loud in a quiet made of new trust. We opened the mouth of it as if it could bite. Air came out that wasn't ours, stale sweetness, a room folded into itself. On top lay a child's drawing, crumpled and softened by handling. A puppy with ears too big and a little feather floating above him, both outlined in heavy pencil. Across the bottom, crooked with love and panic, it read, "Don't leave him." The letters climbed as if they were trying to reach him in time. Beneath the paper was a cheap white t-shirt, that the kind you buy in a pack and wear until it knows your shape. It held soap and skin and the echo of a hug. I lifted it, and the bag breathed again, and for a second, the room felt like someone had come back to switch off a light they forgot. Under that, a glossy card with a red banner and one word in block letters that had already changed his life. Someone had turned the page, and he fell out of the margin. He wasn't guarding trash. He was guarding proof. Proof that hands had once carried him and voices had once said his name, even if we never heard it. This is what rescue recovery looks like when it starts in the throat and not on paper. Not a mystery solved, but a promise explained. Not a leash, but a ledger of scent. I put the drawing back first and smoothed the creases like a bandage. I folded the shirt with the kind of care you save for a flag. Delia closed her eyes and breathed through her mouth so she wouldn't steal what he needed. He twitched once, then settled, and my chest did the same. He wasn't lost because nobody wanted him. He was an orphan puppy holding on to the last warm corner of a home that had to leave. And maybe that was enough for one more night. I put everything back and whispered, "We won't leave." Sometimes the past just goes soft. A summer storm rolled in and pressed its thumb on the roof. The gutters overflowed, the eaves drummed, windows sweated, and the air went heavy, like the room forgot how to rise. Uh, he woke with a start, nose already searching. I set the white bag by his cheek, the way we had learned, and listened to the first fat drops run their fingers along the edge of the house. One leak found a seam in the ceiling, then a lip in the trim, then gravity. A line of water tapped the floor, steady as breath. Another bead found the bag. The plastic dimpled, then sagged, then pulled. He caught the change before I did, and made a sound I hadn't heard yet. Thin, rising, breaking. He lunged forward, and the seam split like a quiet shirt tearing in the dark. He tried to gather it with his mouth, paws scrabbling, nails clicking the frantic code I never want to hear again. The food sat untouched. The water went warm. He spun small circles and then smaller, as if he could wind time back onto the spool. Delia folded herself around her quiet and cried without moving, one hand over her mouth to keep hope from making promises it couldn't keep. I grabbed the hairdryer and a towel and did the worst kind of math. What could be saved, what could not? Warm air lifted a corner, then another, but the center had already become soup. Ink bled. Edges turned to lace, and then to nothing. The room filled with the smell of soap and a hallway I'd never see. All the rescue care I could offer felt tiny in the face of a wet fistful of memory. He keened until the sound frayed itself to threads. A heartbroken puppy doesn't ask for more. He asks for the same, and the world says it can't be given back. I spread what remained on the towel, 2 small panels of plastic, a strip that still held warmth, something that might once have been a corner. He nosed each piece like a detective who already knows the ending. I spoke low and slow, offering the floor of my voice, not the ceiling. Easy. I'm here. I slid the largest scrap to his cheek and let it be his choice again. He took it, then let it go, then pressed his face to the towel as if he could will the parts into a whole. Thunder trailed off and left a hush that wasn't kind. He stopped moving. He sat across from us and lowered his head into my empty hands. If you can't bring the thing back, you can keep its meaning. After the storm, the house felt hollow, like a shell that had learned our names. He lay between us on the kitchen rug, scraps of plastic drying on a towel like wet leaves. Delia gathered what could still hold a stitch. She threaded a needle with hands that usually opened jars and fixed loose buttons and soothed bad dreams. I held the lamp low and quiet. The night had already taken enough. She cut the pieces into soft arcs and thin spines. She worked from memory. The curve we'd seen scratched on the bag, a feather pointed toward morning. From the shirt, she saved a small square, still warm with the ghost of someone who once wore it. She tucked that square inside the shape like a secret heartbeat. Fabric met fabric with tiny bites of thread, and the room remembered how to hope in whispers. I cleaned the bowl, reset the water, and told myself not to hurry the clock. He watched with half-lidded eyes, tail still, breath uneven. The word I had given him waited on my tongue, polite and ready. Delia knotted the last stitch, smoothed the cotton, and placed the little feather in my open palm. It was light enough to float if breath were water. Morning came honest and unshiny. I set the feather beside his cheek and let silence make the first offer. "Quill," I said once. He sniffed, a tremor running from nose to shoulder, and then the air changed. He nudged the cotton edge, found the smell folded inside, and let the tremor pass through him instead of staying. We have one word for a small dog, and I'll use it here once because it belongs. Puppy. What we saw next was a healing puppy choosing rest without permission slips from the past. He lowered his weight, turned his face, and placed his head on the feather as if it were the hand he'd been missing. His eyes closed, his ribs slowed. He slept like someone had finally said to him, "You are home. Sometimes love is a thing you hand over." He woke in a quiet that didn't ask questions. The little feather lay under his cheek like a tide that had finally come in. He blinked once, then twice, as if counting the room back into place. I stayed still and let him find the shape of morning without help. He breathed, then stood, and the world did not tilt. He took the feather in his mouth and looked at me like a messenger who had finally learned the route. No cry, no shiver, just the small decision that changes a life. He walked the slow space between us and placed the feather in my open hand. It was lighter than I remembered, or maybe my hand had been waiting for it too long. He held my eyes until my chest remembered how to move. The tale started then, not a parade, just a soft metronome finding time. A brave pup, and everything gentle about the word brave sat down beside him. I said thank you without sound. He leaned his forehead into my fingers and let the room be ordinary for the first time. Then he turned, feather reclaimed, and trotted the hallway with the uneven pride of a kid in new shoes. Paws tapping, ears catching light, a little stumble, and then a laugh that didn't need a voice. He came back on his own, carrying the same proof he used to guard like a gate. He set it in Delia's palm as if to say, "This belongs to you too." She didn't move for a heartbeat, then closed her fingers and returned it to him with a smile that understood. He accepted the trade like a ritual no one had to teach. This is what a trust-building dog looks like. Not a trick, not a command. A gift given, taken back, and given again until the giving becomes a language. He made a circle of us, one small feather at a time, and the house learned to breathe with it. He settled between us and touched my wrist with his nose just once. He didn't listen for footsteps outside. He didn't check the door. He lifted the feather, then laid it down where our hands met. That day, he stopped calling the ones who left. He called us. Happiness is when a sound finally has a name. At the counter, they scanned for a chip and waited for the little green light that might mean someone was already on his paper. Nothing. Just a number assigned today and the quiet relief that comes when a door opens without a hinge. They weighed him, listened again, and handed us forms that felt heavier than they looked. I signed where they pointed, slow, as if my hand understood the promise before my head did. Delia held the feather and the leash we still hadn't asked him to wear. Somewhere a printer clicked, and a new line of his life arrived warm to the touch. They wrote it in plain words anyone could read. Adopted puppy. We thanked them with the kind of gratitude that doesn't know where to sit. He tucked his face into my wrist, and the world fit better. We took the long way home and stopped where trees make their own ceiling. He carried the feather with a seriousness that made me want to walk softer. 3 steps, look back. 3 more, look back again. Each glance was a question and an answer at once. Birds argued in the canopy, and he listened, then checked us like a compass. When a jogger passed, he pressed his shoulder to my calf, then remembered he had something important to hold and lifted it higher. A forever home dog doesn't know the phrase. He knows the sound of shoes that don't leave. He knows the measure of footsteps that keep choosing him. By afternoon, the sky cleared into the kind of blue that forgives. We turned onto our street and found Miss Garner by her fence, hands folded like she'd been waiting on a bell. She smiled without making a noise that might startle the day. He paused, feather proud, and gave her a look that said what our mouths couldn't tidy into words. She nodded, because some stories you applaud with your face. Inside, he made a slow lap of every room as if counting new corners into memory. He tested the rug, the cool of tile, the warmth of a sun square climbing the floor. He didn't listen for a truck or a door that wouldn't open. He set the feather down, picked it up, set it down again where our hands would meet later. That evening, he fell asleep without tears, and he placed the feather between us. One thing saved the memory. People saved the life. We didn't keep an object. We kept a meaning. The feather was never magic. It was a bridge he could cross without losing who he loved. When before finally loosened its grip, now had somewhere to land. He carried the feather to us, and we carried him forward. No pleading at the door, no listening for wheels in the dark, just a small heartbeat learning the shape of home, one quiet morning after another. What healed him wasn't luck. It was time measured in hands, food measured in breaths, and a room that refused to hurry. It was the promise that if he set the past down, someone would hold it with him. When people keep showing up for rescue dogs, a small life remembers how to breathe. That's the whole miracle. Not loud, just true enough to change a day. This little guy's journey from abandonment to rehabilitation shows how important nonprofit rescue groups really are. Caring for a rescued puppy is more than love. It's responsibility. It's pet care. If his story reached you, share to save dogs. Your share pushes this video to the people who watch dogs, love dogs, and step in when a cry needs an answer. Every view that turns into a hand can be the difference between waiting alone and being found. Join our Brave Paws family. Be their voice. Be their hope.